All right, well, it's the 1st of July, of course, today, and that means the start of a new financial year. So what's ahead in terms of our COVID recovery, given the risk Victoria poses to our economic fortunes? Joining me now is the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly from Sydney. Paul, given what we know about Victoria and the fact that everyone's sort of pulling up their drawbridge to Victorians in the other states, we've got this government support on the table till September at least, and are likely sort of tapering down. Where are we up to in terms of economic recovery?
Well, the fundamental requirement at the moment, Peter, is to ensure that this Victorian outbreak is contained. And there's an enormous effort going into this to ensure there is no second wave. It's a dangerous outbreak. It could get worse, but it must be contained because Australia must deliver on the commitment made by the Prime Minister and the Premiers when we began to reopen the economy. And that was, they warned there would be outbreaks and the outbreaks would be contained. But what Victoria means is there's a shadow over the economic recovery and there's a shadow over economic confidence. And if you like, we've got two Australias. We've got Victoria and the rest of the country. And clearly, there is pressure to maintain border restrictions while we've got this present situation going on in Victoria. In 3 weeks' time, we've got the July mini-budget, when the government will start to show its hand on what happens in the period up to and beyond September. But one thing we know about this is there will be ongoing economic support, but it will be more targeted.
Yeah, well, just the targeting is important because we had this report this week to say 50% of employers say they're struggling to get people to come back to work and they're struggling to fill these vacant positions, given the disincentive that the double dole is. The PM spoke about that as well.
We are getting a lot of anecdotal feedback from small businesses and even large businesses where some of them are finding it hard to get people to come and take the shifts because they're on these higher levels of payment. And so we've just got to make sure that we continue to provide what is a reasonable level of support in the middle of the worst recession we've had since the Great Depression. But at the same time, we can't let the help get in the way.
Yeah, and there's no way the government can cut it off come September, as they perhaps initially had suggested they might. As the legislation suggests, there will have to be some sort of accommodation going forward. But it can't stay where it is now, can it?
No, it can't. And it's a bit of a diabolical problem because as Scott Morrison because as the Prime Minister just indicated in that grab, there's a disincentive effect when it comes to JobKeeper. So the government's got to address that. But it's also got to address the fact that there's got to be ongoing support in certain areas. So it's going to be quite tricky to get this design right.
20 years ago today, since the GST was introduced, it was a massive campaign to get it up. Closely run, I have to say. Remember it all very well, and then on forward to sort of bed everything down. There's been a major review into a consumption tax and many other reforms in New South Wales. They're asking, or certainly debating, whether it should be lifted, the rate and the base broadened. I'm keen to hear what you've got to say, because I have to give credit here, don't we, to the New South Wales Treasurer for at least having or being prepared to have the debate about tax reform, because too much of it, I think, tends to be driven by the Commonwealth in the past, and the states are a big part of the problem and hopefully solution.
Well, it is good to see the New South Wales Treasurer making this very constructive contribution. I think what we need to bear in mind today, Peter, is just how enormous was the economic and political achievement of John Howard and Peter Costello more than 20 years ago. I think there is a very strong policy argument to further enhance the GST. There's no doubt about that. But my own view about this is that there is no way this can be achieved politically, because I think the political roadblocks are simply too great. Increasing the GST would be unpopular. The Morrison government has very little leeway in terms of seats. We know what happened 20 years ago was that the Howard government had to win 2 elections to get this up, in 1998 and then again in 2001. And the attitude of the Labor Party has not changed. The attitude of the Labor Party is that it is ideologically opposed to increases in the GST, and it will fight a campaign against this. And I think that the point to make about the Morrison government is that both the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are aware of the danger of running on a GST and having changes to the GST define and subvert their entire reform agenda. At the moment, their thinking is that they have no intention of running on GST changes, and I think that is a very prudent and sensible political judgment at this point in time.
I guess the frustration there, though, is if you look around the world, no one has a GST, or very few countries, developed economies, have a GST as low as we do, or a value-added tax as low as we do. Every single day there's someone out there clamouring for money to be spent, or more money to be spent here, there or everywhere. You've got the states walking away, other than New South Wales, walking away from the reform debate. We know the Commonwealth has to change the GST, but the states get the benefit. When are we going to be grown up enough in this country to have the debates we need? We can have them about same-sex marriage. There's a constant debate about climate change, but we've got to have a conversation about how on earth we pay for our future. $300 billion on military expenses today and more. We've had all of the costs incurred with COVID-19, Paul Kelly. Are we big enough to have that debate anymore in Australia, soberly?
Well, we are going to have a debate about economic reform. The Prime Minister's made that clear. He's identified a range of areas, a very broad range of areas. There's no question at all, given the economic challenge, given the extra defence spending that you've just identified, that we have to fundamentally change and rethink a lot of economic policy areas. But this is a very broad spectrum. Now, my own view about this is, and I'm a committed economic reformer, but my own view about this is I fear putting the GST on the table will actually undermine the broad reform agenda. There are plenty of other areas that we do need to address, including other areas of tax reform. But the GST is the single most difficult political challenge. And at the moment, I do not think that there is a political way through here.
I do agree it's tough, but I think some of these things are necessary. Paul Kelly, thank you for your time.